The old farmhouse in Willow Creek, Ohio, stood like a sentinel against the march of time, its weathered clapboards painted with memories of decades past. To the grandchildren, Sophie, 9, and Ethan, 11, it was a magical place, filled with creaky floors and dusty corners that whispered secrets. But the real magic lived in their grandfather, Henry Whitaker, known to them as Granddad, a man whose twinkling blue eyes and calloused hands hinted at a life brimming with stories. Every summer, Sophie and Ethan would pile into their parents' minivan for the long drive from Columbus to spend 2 weeks with Granddad, and this year, 2025, was no different, except for the promise of something extraordinary. Henry, at 78, was a wiry figure with a shock of white hair and a grin that could charm the birds from the trees. He'd been a mechanic, a pilot, and if you believed the rumors, a bit of a rogue in his youth. The kids adored him, not just for his homemade root beer floats, but for the way he could spin a tale that made the world feel bigger, wilder, and full of possibility. This summer, though, Henry had a plan. He'd been feeling the weight of his years, the ache in his joints, and the quiet tug of mortality. It was time to pass on his treasures, not gold or jewels, but the stories of his life, the lessons he'd learned, and the talents he'd honed over decades. The first evening, after a supper of fried chicken and cornbread, the three of them settled in the living room. The fireplace crackled, casting shadows on the walls, lined with faded photographs and shelves of knickknacks. A model airplane, a brass compass, a battered harmonica. Sophie curled up on the couch, her braids swinging as she clutched a mug of hot cocoa. Ethan, ever the skeptic, sprawled on the rug, fiddling with a Rubik's Cube. Henry eased into his worn leather recliner, his hands resting on his knees like a man about to unveil a great mystery. "Kids," he began, his voice warm as the fire, "you ever wonder what I got up to before I was your granddad?" Ethan smirked, not looking up. "You fixed cars, right? And flew planes." Sophie's eyes widened. "Did you ever crash one?" Henry chuckled, the sound low and rich. "Oh, I've had my share of close calls. But it's not just the planes or the cars. I've got treasures, hidden ones. Not the kind you bury in the ground, but the kind you carry here." He tapped his chest, then his temple. "And I reckon it's time I shared 'em with you." Sophie leaned forward, nearly spilling her cocoa. "Like what, Granddad?" "Stories," he said, "and maybe a few tricks. But you gotta earn 'em. Each day, I'll tell you a story from my old days, and I'll teach you something I learned along the way. By the end of the week, you'll have your own treasures to keep." Ethan finally set the Rubik's Cube aside, intrigued despite himself. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Henry said, winking. "Just listen, learn, and maybe believe a little magic still exists." Day 1. The Midnight Run. The next morning, after a breakfast of pancakes dripping with maple syrup, Henry led the kids to the barn behind the house. The structure was a relic, its red paint peeling, but inside it was a treasure trove of history. An old biplane fuselage, long retired, sat in one corner, and a workbench was cluttered with tools, blueprints, and a half-built model ship. Henry gestured to a wooden crate in the center of the barn, covered with a tarp. He pulled it back to reveal a gleaming motorcycle, its chrome sparkling even in the dim light. "Whoa!" Ethan breathed, stepping closer. "Is that yours?" "Was," Henry said. "A 1955 Indian chief. She and I had some adventures. Let me tell you about the Midnight Run." He settled onto a stool, and the kids perched on hay bales, their eyes fixed on him. Henry's voice took on a rhythm like a song he'd sung 1,000 times. "Back in '68, I was 21, wild as a Mustang and living in Reno. I'd been fixing bikes for a fella named Jimmy Voss who ran a garage but also dabbled in, let's call 'em side hustles. One night, Jimmy comes to me and says, 'Hank, I need you to ride this bike to Carson City. Midnight, no questions.' I wasn't dumb. I knew it was trouble. But the pay was good, and I was young and fearless." Sophie's mouth formed a perfect O. "Were you smuggling something?" Henry laughed. Sharp as a tack, Sophie. Let's just say the saddlebags had some extra weight I didn't look into. So I hit the road, the desert stretching out under a sky full of stars. The Indian roared like a lion, and I felt like I owned the night. But halfway there, I see headlights in my mirror, 2 cars moving fast. Jimmy's rivals, I figured, or worse, the law. Ethan leaned in. "What did you do?" "I gunned it," Henry said, his eyes glinting. "Took a back road through the hills, no lights, just me and the moonlight. The bike handled like a dream, but those cars were relentless. I remembered a trick my old man taught me. How to read the land. I spotted a dry riverbed, barely visible, and veered into it. Hid there, engine off, heart pounding, till they passed. Delivered the goods by dawn, and Jimmy never knew how close I came to losing it all." Sophie clapped her hands. "You were like a cowboy." "Maybe," Henry said. "But it taught me something. Courage ain't about being fearless. It's about keeping your head when fear's screaming in your ear." He stood and beckoned them to the motorcycle. "Now, here's your treasure for today. How to listen to a machine." For the next hour, he showed them how to check the bike's oil, adjust the throttle, and feel the hum of a well-tuned engine. Ethan, who loved gadgets, soaked it up, while Sophie asked endless questions about the desert and the stars. By lunchtime, they were greasy, grinning, and already begging for another story. Day 2. The sky's the limit the following day. Henry took the kids to the hayloft, where the old biplane fuselage gleamed under a tarp. Its wings were long gone, but the cockpit was intact, a shrine to Henry's days as a crop duster and stunt pilot. He climbed in, his movements slow but sure, and gestured for the kids to join him. Sophie squeezed into the co-pilot's seat, while Ethan leaned over the edge, examining the dials. "This old girl," Henry said, patting the dashboard, "flew me through some wild times. Let me tell you about the day I danced with the sky. It was 1975 and Henry was 28, working for a crop dusting outfit in Nebraska. The pay was lousy, but the freedom of the skies was worth it. One summer, a barnstorming troupe came through town, performing stunts at the county fair. Their lead pilot got sick, and Henry, cocky as ever, volunteered to fill in. "I'd never done a loop-the-loop in front of a crowd," he said, "but I'd practiced in secret, pushing this plane to its limits." The day of the show, the fairground was packed, families, farmers, kids like you, all looking up. I took off, the engine roaring, and started with barrel rolls, easy stuff. Then came the big one, a double loop, followed by a dive so low I could see the whites of their eyes, Sophie gasped. "Weren't you scared?" "Terrified," Henry admitted. "But up there it's just you and the plane. You trust her, and she trusts you." I pulled it off, and the crowd went wild. Landed to cheers and a free beer from the fair boss. But the real lesson? Trust your instincts, but know your limits. I never pushed that plane past what she could give. He spent the afternoon teaching them about flight. Using a model plane, he explained lift and drag, letting Ethan hold the controls while Sophie sketched the dials in her notebook. They built a kite from balsa wood and string, and by dusk, they were running across the field, laughing as it soared. Henry watched, his heart full, knowing they'd carry this moment forever. Day 3, the song of the radon. The third day, Henry brought out the harmonica from the living room shelf. Its silver was tarnished, but it gleamed with history. They sat on the porch, the summer breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Sophie twirled a dandelion, and Ethan tapped his foot, impatient for the story. "This," Henry said, holding up the harmonica, "was my companion on the road. Let me tell you about the summer I wandered. In 1980, at 33, Henry had grown restless. He'd saved enough to buy a beat-up van and hit the road, drifting from town to town, fixing cars for cash and playing the harmonica at bars and campfires. One night in Memphis, he stumbled into a blues joint, where a grizzled musician named Big Joe heard him play. Joe said I had soul, Henry recalled. He invited me to jam with his band. I was no pro, but I poured my heart into it, every note a piece of me. We played till dawn, and the crowd, they didn't just clap, they felt it. That night, I learned music isn't about perfection, it's about telling your truth. Sophie tilted her head. Can you still play? Henry grinned and put the harmonica to his lips. The notes were raw, soulful, weaving a melody that seemed to carry the weight of his years. The kids were mesmerized. He taught them a simple tune, patient as they fumbled, and by evening Sophie could play a shaky Twinkle, Twinkle, while Ethan managed a bluesy riff. The porch became their stage, and Henry's heart swelled at their joy. Day 4. The Fixer's Code. The next day, Henry led them to the workbench where a broken clock radio sat among his tools. He handed Ethan a screwdriver and Sophie a pair of pliers, his eyes twinkling. Fixing things, he said, is like fixing life. Let me tell you about the Fixer's Code. In 1990, Henry was 43, running his own garage in Willow Creek. Farmer named Amos brought in a tractor that was more rust than machine. Amos couldn't afford a new one, and the harvest was coming. Henry worked day and night, scavenging parts, welding, cursing, and praying. On the last day, with Amos watching, Henry fired up the tractor. It roared to life, and Amos wept. That, Henry said, was worth more than any paycheck. The Fixer's Code is simple. You don't give up on what matters, whether it's a machine or a person. He guided them through repairing the radio, teaching patience and precision. When it crackled to life, playing an oldies station, Sophie danced and Ethan whooped. Henry saw their pride and knew they'd learned more than mechanics. Day 5. The Hidden Treasure. On the final day, Henry took them to the attic where a locked trunk sat under a dusty sheet. He opened it to reveal a collection of mementos, a pilot's logbook, a harmonica case, a motorcycle key, and a photo of a young Henry grinning beside his plane. The kids were wide-eyed. These are my treasures, he said. But the real ones are the stories I've told you and the ones you'll tell someday. Life's an adventure, kids. Be brave, trust yourself, and never stop learning. He gave Sophie the harmonica and Ethan the motorcycle key, promising to teach them more when they were older. As they hugged him, Henry felt the years melt away, knowing his treasures would live on in them. The summer ended, but the stories didn't. Sophie and Ethan returned each year, carrying Granddad's lessons into their own adventures. The farmhouse remained, a keeper of secrets, and Henry, though slower with age, never lost his twinkle. His treasures weren't hidden anymore. They were alive in the hearts of his grandchildren, ready to be shared with the world.